Welcome to Module B, Lecture 4. In Lecture 3, we were discussing about information needs for travel demand forecasting. We discussed about the importance of the study area, how to define the study area boundary, how to subdivide this study area into different traffic zones. Then we talked about the data related to urban activities, also the data related to transportation systems. We talked about the network geometry, what is connected to what point, and then what kind of level of service or how comfortably they are connected, or what is the travel time or the travel cost relates to that. So, that is the level of service, what gets connected to what, and how good or bad they are connected. Okay. So, all these are important. We also discussed about the network transportation network development or network related data for private vehicles and also for the transit, and we said that how different they are, why they are different, why multiple layers are important, all these were discussed. So, if we come back just to recall or to remind ourselves again that there are four major areas we need the data. One relates to the study area, then urban activities, then transportation system, and then travel information. And if we have all these four data in all these four areas, covering all these four areas, then we are ready to go ahead with the travel demand forecasting process. So, we discussed about study area, urban activities and transportation system. What was pending is travel information. So, this lecture we focus on this aspect, that is travel information. Now, information on how, when and where people are currently traveling, that is the key for the forecasting process. Many cases we said that about the, we talked about the distribution, we talked about the mode choice, we talked about the traffic assignment. In all cases we need information such as how, when and where people are currently traveling. This information is studied to determine basically the underlying factors causing people to make certain travel decisions. So, our objective is basically to model this decision, how the decisions are made, when to travel, where to travel, by which mode people are traveling, how such decisions are made, which are the factors that are controlling decision, and then to develop a model so that we can predict that under similar or even a changed scenario what the decisions are expected to be, and linking those decisions to the overall travel demand forecast. So, data which are extremely important, there are many data which are really important related to travel. One very common, but very vital data is basically the origin destination data. So, origin destination data provides information on where trips come from, where they go, by what mode the trips are being made, for what purpose the trips are made, and also the characteristics of the trip makers, and what are the kind of activities that are there at the origin zone and the destination zone. So, practically a very good amount of information that we get from the OD data. I repeat it here, where from the trip is coming, where they are going, by which mode the trips are being made, for what purpose the trips are being made, characteristics of the trip makers, and also the kind of activities in the origin area and the destination area. Through simple questions we try to get answer to get all this information. Various data collection techniques are used to get the OD data in sufficient details, and we use it for multiple purposes. Basically, to estimate the model parameters. As I said, this is very important, because in the base year you need to know the dependent and independent variables both, then you can develop the relationship. So, model building is all about capturing the relationship. So, we need independent and dependent variables both. Some of the initial decisions which are very important, and I am mentioning here just to avoid any kind of confusion in this regard. Some of the points are very important, that is why I bring it here. Say the decisions related to whether to use vehicle trips or person trips for the analysis. One can do both, one can use person trips, one can use also vehicle trips. And the second is how to stratify trip purpose classifications. These are the two initial decisions that we need to make when we are developing the database related to travel. Coming to the first point, whether to use vehicle trips or the person trips, that decision directly relates to the needs and objective of the study. What for we are doing? Suppose, for example, if we are doing it for anything related to public transport is the consideration, right, then obviously the person trip data is the key, right. And if we take the person trip data, then actually the mode choice models also, of course, also gets developed based on that, right, because the person trip data can give us lot of other information. As I said, that just imagine the mode choice model is very important, and if you are really developing the model for an area where you have lot of choice riders and you are talking about the working on the public transport aspect, then obviously the person data. So, generally I would say yes, more desirable, and probably for many works you need to use the person trip data, but of course, there could be occasions where the requirement is very different, and in those cases you can also use vehicle trip data, or even vehicle trip wise you develop the matrix. That means, you develop the, also sometimes we do, like we develop the person trip data, or maybe the vehicle trip wise we develop the matrix, say public transport matrix, intermediate public transport matrix, private vehicle matrix, separately we develop. So, it depends on the purpose, but you understand it very clearly that that what is the gain, or where we actually really need the person trip data, right, especially in the context of public transport. Stratification, again, the number of classification depends on the size of the study area and the scope and objective of the study. Again, what is your focus, what for you are doing, what is the problem that is there at the back of the mind, which motivated you to take up this work, right. Or sometimes it is not that nobody will take a transportation planning series just for doing it. There are specific objectives, that there are certain problems which are the focus, and you need to carry out a transportation planning study to systematically approach to that problem and to get solution. So, based on that, a higher number or a lower number of classifications you may do it. Remember one thing, if we are making classification, for each classification of trips we need adequate data, otherwise we cannot develop, cannot treat this kind of trips separately in our whole analysis. So, that is one very important thing. You know that how much resource you have, what the computer time is available, what kind of how much time you can spend for the data preparation. So, all such things should be duly considered and the implications must be known right before you do it. So, it is basically the context, the need and also how much resource is available, and knowing that if I am taking 5 different ways I am classifying the trip, then I for each classification I need adequate number of data or adequate data to really use that trip classification successfully in the subsequent analysis. Some of the examples I gave, that trip purpose stratification, say for example, home based work, home based other, non home based trip, right. So, what are they mean? Home based work means trips between a person's home and the place of employment for work purpose. That is always. So, if one end is home, the other end is work, it does not matter. When you ask the person, maybe he is going from home to office or he may be going from back home from office, right. So, one case he may say I am coming from home and going to office, another case he or she may say I am coming from office and going back to home, but in both cases it is home based work, because home is there right in one end. So, it is a home based trip, and because that other end it is work purpose. So, you can say home based work, right. So, similarly non home based other means again one end is the home end, or the other end the travel is for any other purpose other than work. So, it may be home based other. So, similarly non home based trip, that neither end of the trip is actually home. You go to the office and from office you go to bank and come back to office. So, neither end is home. So, this will come under non home based trip. Similarly, other way you can think internal external trips, right. In this module itself somewhere we told about this cordon area. When we talked about the study area boundary, we said that imaginary line is called the cordon. So, cordon also we need to do the survey, because we need to understand how many vehicles or how many trips or how many persons are travelling from outside to inside or inside to outside, right. So, it may be external internal trips, internal external trips. That means, trip is getting produced inside, but actually going outside. So, the destination is outside. Maybe people living in the city area, which is within the study area, but going outside the study area for work. So, every day from the city they go outside for work and then come back in the evening. Maybe through trip. What is through trip? Through trip means the origin of the trip is outside the study area, and the trip is actually going to again a place which is also outside the study area. So, the trip is neither originating within this area, within the study area, nor it is terminating within the study area. Everything is outside. But then what is the context? Maybe simply it is actually travelling through the study area. Why? Maybe the road is passing through that. You want to travel from A to B, A is also not within your study area, B is also not within your study area, but the road what is connecting A to B is passing through the urban centers or urban area. So, that trip is still a relevant trip for you, and maybe you want to know, say for example, this through trip is typically very important when you want to do the bypass planning for a city, whether you need a bypass or not, right. So, we need to find out how much is the through trip. If through trip is really significant, then to decongest the city road, the best way if possible, other way, I mean depending on the land, depending on other consideration, is to have a bypass. So, you do not want all these vehicles to go to the city, because city roads are otherwise congested and you do not want to aggravate congestion and make the city more polluting and make all these vehicle emit smoke and dust basically inside the city road, inside the city area. So, you may say okay, these vehicles have nothing to do with the city, simply the road is passing through the city, so they are going. So, let me have a bypass, right. So, in different ways it depends on what is really at the back of the mind for for which this transportation study is taken or is being carried out, right. So, depending on that you have to use a proper certification. Then next part is defining productions and attractions. This is again another very important aspect, some of the very cardinal thing what are really important. Household characteristics related to travel are easier to identify and forecast, right. So, the planners use home as a base to predict travel, right. So, that is one aspect. This convention requires a distinction in terms of origin, destination and production attraction, which often cause confusion. Home is very, very important. Home is always important, whether it is for transportation planning or for any other purpose, right. So, the home and the household characteristics are very, very important, but then sometimes there is a confusion about origin, destination and production attraction. So, let us try to make it clear once for all. When we say origin, destination, any trip, the beginning of the trip is the origin point, the end of the trip is the destination point. So, any trip starts from A, starting from A going to B, A is the origin, B is the destination, right, no confusion. But that does not hold true for productions and attractions. We cannot say a travel trip is made from A to B, so the production is at A and attraction is at B. That is not always true. Why? Let us understand that. I am mentioning here a few rules which will be very important for you. Rule 1 is trips that either begin or end at traveler's home are always produced at the home end. So, if origin or destination any one of these is home end, then the trip production is always at home end. Why? Even though you are intercepting somebody when that person is coming back from office to home, coming back from office, it is simply he is saying I am coming from office going back home, because you are actually capturing or intercepting him in the afternoon or evening when he is or she is going back. That is the simple reason. But trip does not produce trip, a office does not produce trip, office attract trips. Production is always home end. If there is, so if there is origin or destination, if any one end is basically the home end, so trip is always produced at the home end. Rule 2, trips that either begin or end at traveler's home are attracted to the non-home end. So, production if it is home end, then obviously the other end is the attraction. So, being it office, being it shopping, being it any other purpose, right. Rule 3 is trips that begin at a non-home end or non-home location and end at another non-home location, for those trips that neither end is home end, in that case we can say the trip production where at the origin, attraction where at the destination, simple. In that case only origin, destination, production and attraction maybe you can consider synonymous. Origin means that is the production, destination means that is the attraction. But the moment the home is there, it is not so. Any trip, whether the origin or the destination, if there is one end is the home end, then trip is always produced in the home end. The production is the home end and attraction is the other end. So, that is the 3 rules what you should always remember. Then let us consider a person starts from home going to office, that is trip number 1, then office going to store and from store going back to home. So, 3 trips are made: home to office, office to store, store to home. So, trip number 1 what we say, produced at home and attracted to office. So, it is what? It is basically home based work trip, right, as per the definition. Trip number 2, produced at the office and attracted to store. So, this is what? This is non home based other trip, because neither end is the home end. Trip 3 is from store to home, but one end is home. So, we are saying produced at home and attracted to store, right. So, it is also home based, but not home based work, but home based other trip, right. So, the 3 examples we gave earlier, we said that 3 possible classification: home based work, home based other, non home based, right. So, all 3 examples we gave you here. Then when you are processing the data, the very first thing, travel data processing, you need to develop calibration file. What are calibration file? From additive trip information, a file that includes an entry of each trip service can be developed. Each trip. Earlier example what I gave, I say trip 1, trip 2, trip 3. So, each trip information is recorded. Each entry represents a complete description of trip. That means, information about the trip makers along with where the trip was produced, where it was attracted, what was the purpose of that, what was the mode used for that trip, all are there. So, one record for a complete record for one trip. This calibration file then be used in various phases of the forecasting process. It may be used for trip distribution, it may be used for mode choice analysis, right, depending on what is the context, right. It may be used in different phases of the forecasting process to provide observed travel information against the models are calibrated. So, this gives you the observed travel information against which we will calibrate the model. Then next part is developing trip table. What is that? A trip table is simply a matrix representation showing many trips are interchanged between the various zones in the study area. Once you have basically the calibration files, there will be many trips. Now, all trips together, once you try to analyze, you will find A to B, so many trips are happening, right. So, you simply finally make a trip table, simply a matrix showing that how many trips are interchanged between the various zones, I to j, how many trips are happening. The calibration file just mentioned provides the basic data to generate what is called a trip table. Where from the trip table is getting? We are getting, how we are getting the trip table? We are getting from basically the calibration data, calibration file. So, calibration file put together so many trips, individual trips, we are then developing the trip table. A trip table may be produced for each trip purpose category. We can say that okay, all work trips we extract separately and make a matrix which is for the work trip. Similarly, maybe home based work, home based other, non home based trip, and so on and so forth, right. We can have different stratification as per the requirement of the project. Then this is an example of trip table, that is what I have shown here. What it says that 10 trips are produced in zone I, but those 10 trips stay within zone I itself, the zone 1 itself. So, they are produced in zone I and they stay in that is the one. So, what we say here, so that is the 10 trips, they are produced in zone 1 and stays back in zone 1. Then 30 go to zone 2. So, these are the 30 trips which are going to zone 2 and these are the 20 trips which are getting generated in zone 1, but getting attracted to zone 3, right. So, this kind of trip tables we get. The sum of the rows of the trip table is equivalent to zone trip production. So, 1 to 1, if we just consider that there are only 3 zones, then 1 to 1, 1 to 2, 1 to 3. If I add all of them, what does it mean? How many is total is produced in zone 1? So, that is 60, 60 is the production. Similarly, if I take any column, so let us say middle column, if I take this column, we say 1 to 2, 2 to 2, 3 to 2, that means how many total are going to 2. If I add all this, I will get how many total are going to 2. That means that is the trip attraction for zone 2, right. Now, developing the initial travel impedance, that is the next one. Travel forecasting process relies on the feedback to check the initial assumptions on travel times. We said we started with some assumption of travel time, then only based on that travel time or travel cost, we did the distribution, we did the mode choice, but then finally assignment we know how much actual load will come on a given link, right. So, and the load will determine that how much will be the really travel time or travel cost. So, we need some kind of checking. So, that is what we say the travel forecasting process relies on feedback to check the initial assumptions on travel time. Initial travel times are best derived by loading the trip table produced by calibration file onto the network. So, you say you got the data. So, what is the average thing, take that, and that may be a good starting point from zone to zone, because you have collected the data, right. You have collected the data and that gives you some representation. So, impedance estimate are required in trip distribution and mode usage analysis. So, we need that. So, what we discussed today in summary, in this lecture again we told you that there are 4 major areas we need the information for carrying out travel demand forecasting, and out of those in this lecture we discussed in details about the travel information part, right. So, we talked about the OD data, which is very important. We said that the confusion should not be there whether we need the vehicle trips or the person trip. We said that if public transport or that kind of work we are doing. So, we obviously need the person trip data. In other cases also we may use person trip data, but overall it depends on the purpose. What is the project about and what is the aim of the project, context, accordingly we have to take a final call. Similarly, the trip purpose stratifications we say, we explained you what are the different possibilities or possible stratification that one can use, and we said that it is again context specific. The transportation planning, nobody will just give you, okay, let us do a transportation planning study. They must be having some purpose in mind, right. So, of course, once you do it, you can do many other things probably, but what is the basic objective of doing this work? Accordingly, you have to select the stratification. Then we said something very clearly, how origin, destination and production attractions may be same or may be different. They may not be same if there is a home end in either origin or destination. If there is a home end, whether it is origin, whether it is a destination, trip is always produced at home and get attracted to other end. And if none of these origin or destination is actually a home end, then trip is produced at origin and get attracted at the destination. Okay. Then we discussed briefly about the processing of travel data, how to develop the calibration file, trip tables and the initial travel impedance. Once you have the trip table data, you know so many people have traveled from one zone to another zone, what is their travel time by different modes. So, you get some ideas of the zone to zone travel time, which you use as a starting point, right, for doing your trip distribution, mode choice, assignment, all this. But then finally, you can always go back because you know once the loading has been done based on actual loading, what is then the actual travel time or travel cost, accordingly you may go and update the whole process, right. Thank you so much.